Good afternoon or good morning, depending on your time zone. A very warm welcome and thank you for joining this live BSI webinar on what's beyond the IATF transition, analysis of non-conformities and next steps. I'm Ellie Mosquita and I'm here today to help facilitate the webinar. With me is guest speaker Rob Brown, BSI's Automotive Global Product Champion. Recognised globally as an expert on automotive quality management systems and lean manufacturing, Rob has over 25 years of industry experience. During 18 years with SMMT, Rob spent 6 years implementing lean manufacturing in the supply chain with Honda, Nissan and Toyota. He also spent 12 years as the IATF SMMT Oversight Manager and is recognised as a leading expert in both the specification and management of the IATF automotive scheme, IATF 16949. Rob is therefore ideally placed to help guide us through the topics in today's webinar. Now over to Rob, who will kick off today's webinar presentation.
Good morning and good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are in the world. I appreciate there's some people in North America dialing in. Welcome. You can see on the screen in front of you the rough agenda for what we're going to go through. So we can look at transition and what happened during transition. The current certificates as of the 15th of January, which was officially the end of anything that could be done with transition, where you went through the 90-day NC closeout and the veto review and certificate decision. Then we'll take a look at the top 10 major and top 10 minor non-conformities. We'll look at the impact major non-conformities have on surveillance audits. We'll have a look at the recently released SIs and FAQs against the standard, I think in November last year, and also the SIs and FAQs for the Rules 5th. And we'll look at the Common Audit Report, and I'll explain what's been going on with the Common Audit Report. That's the Common IATF Auditor Report. And then as part of the follow-up, we'll share a link with the new BSI Automotive Sector video. So you look at how we're lined up with other standards and mobility and such things like that. And as Ellie said, when we get to the end of the slides, we'll open up and take questions. So let's look at transition and what happened. Firstly, let's just have a look at and reconfirm the IATF membership. So as we've seen for many years now, the IATF membership stays the same. Effectively, the 9 OEM members, the 9 vehicle manufacturers, the 5 national associations, and then the whole governments of the scheme from an oversight point of view in the 5 oversight office, which are supported heavily with the administration office in China, which was opened in Beijing in 2006. So let's maybe we'll see membership change in the next 12 to 18 months. So the transition review. So as we can see on the slide, when we started the transition process, there was 68,330 IATF certificates issued globally. When we got to the end of 15th of September, the day after the transition audit process had finished, there was a drop down to 52,981. So quite a significant drop. But obviously the IATF changed the transition rules through their strategy document, which meant organisations could have the audit up until the 14th of September. And then they were allowed their 90 days NC closure, which then allowed the certification body their time to do the NC closure, the veto review and the certificate decision. So although we dropped significantly as of the 15th of September 2018, you can now see as of the 15th of January 2019, we're almost back to the pre-transition numbers at 67,000 or so. So interesting to see the way the process has gone, and I would imagine by the end of January the certificates will start to be over the pre-transition total. So let's talk IATF certification. Okay, so what we see at the moment globally as of the 15th of January is a whole 67,652 certificates, and you can see the distribution across North America, Europe, Asia Pacific, South and Central America, Africa and Middle East. And you'll see that just over 69% of the certificates are located in the Asia Pacific region, 16% in Europe, almost 9% in North America, and then the other small percentages in South and Central America, Africa and Middle East. If we take time to look at the top 10 countries in terms of certificates, and as we can see, China, almost 30,000 certificates. So probably by now, being as this data was taken on the 15th of January, China will be over 30,000 certificates. So we look at 46% of the global certificates are in China. And then you'll see India, Republic of Korea, USA, Germany, Mexico, Japan, Thailand, Italy, and Taiwan. So 6 of the top 10 countries in terms of certificates are Asia Pacific. I think interestingly, if we went back about a year ago, India would have been probably the 4th largest country in terms of certificate, and now they're the 2nd largest country in terms of certificates. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that we were going to look at the top 10 major nonconformities and the top 10 minor nonconformities. So let's start with the top 10 major nonconformities. Okay, so what we got here is the data from all audits undertaken for IATF 16949 in 2018. So transition audits, transfer audits because they were allowed from July, surveillance audits. This doesn't include the data for special audits where CBs have to come back on site to close nonconformities. And as we can see, the top 2 major nonconformities you can combine together more or less. So corrective action and problem solving. And then of interest, the 6th largest nonconformity is contingency planning. So let's just have a look at where we are in terms of corrective action 10.2.1. But before that, I'm going to hand over to Ellie's going to run the first poll.
Thanks very much, Rob. So the first poll of our webinar this afternoon is on your screen right now. Did you receive a major nonconformity for one of the top 10 areas identified? Just to recap what they were: corrective action, problem solving, control plan, manufacturing design output, control of production, contingency planning, total productive maintenance, internal auditor competency, measurement system analysis, and customer specific requirements. So please answer yes, no, or I don't know. Thank you for answering. The results are in, and so 31% of you have said yes, so you identified one of those top 10, 60% no, and 9% I don't know. So I'm going to pass back to Rob now for his commentary.
Interesting to see 60% not in terms of major nonconformities on that, but we'll run another poll in a minute looking at minors and see whether the percentage changes. But let's just go back to the top 10 majors. So if we look at the top one, 10.2.1 corrective action, that's actually an ISO 9001 requirement. That's not an IATF requirement. So let's just take 5 minutes or so and look at the corrective action, which is a 9001, and look at where we might be able to potentially see where we're at. So yeah, 10.2.1. Sorry, I'm having a glitch with the computer. When a nonconformity occurs, including arising from complaints, the organisation has to look at certain things. So we have to react to the nonconformity as applicable. So we need to take action to control and correct. We need to deal with the consequences. We need to evaluate the need to action to eliminate the cause of the nonconformity in order that it does not reoccur or occur elsewhere. And ISO 9001 gives some direction. It talks about reviewing and analysing the nonconformity, determining the causes of the nonconformity, determine if similar nonconformities exist or could potentially occur. Right, we're back onto it. So let's carry on with 10.2.1, which is corrective action for 9001. Implement any action needed. Review the effectiveness of any corrective action taken. Update risk and opportunities determined during planning if necessary, and make changes to the quality management system if necessary. And then it talks about the corrective action should be appropriate to the effectiveness of the nonconformity. So looking at where we were in terms of it being the top major nonconformity, this is probably as much related to the fact that under surveillance audits, if you have a go on site to do a surveillance audit and you have to follow up on the effectiveness and close out of nonconformities, if the certification body can't effectively close out the nonconformity, then they have to raise the previous nonconformity if it's a minor to a major nonconformity and issue the organisation with a major nonconformity against corrective action, which, as we can see, is the ISO requirement and not the IATF requirement. And if you link corrective action and problem solving together, you can see where the weaknesses are within the quality management system in probably 31%, judging by the poll, against the majors. So I'm going to hand back to Ellie, who's going to run the second poll.
Thanks very much, Rob. So our second poll of this afternoon is on your screen now. And it is, did you receive a major non-conformity against corrective action? And the responses quite simply are yes, no, and I don't know. So 11% of you have said yes, 79% no, and 11% I don't know. So I'm going to hand back over to Rob now.
Thanks, Ellie. Interesting. It would appear that obviously we've got organisations on the webinar today that have got very robust problem solving in terms of corrective action and problem solving, because only 11% of the people had a major nonconformity against 1023, which is corrective action. Yeah, this might be reflective of surveillance audit data as opposed to transition or stage 2. Anyway, let's move on. So you have to remember that in terms of major nonconformity on a surveillance audit, in terms of the IATF rules, it's a mandatory certificate suspension. So certification bodies don't have any option. If there's a major nonconformity raised on a surveillance audit, we automatically have to suspend the certificate in the IATF database. So certificates are suspended. If we think about the Global Oversight website, where you can check the validity of your IATF certificate by putting the IATF certificate number in the validity check, it would still show the IATF certificate as valid. IATF consider that suspension of a certificate still leaves the certificate in a valid status. So other than oversight and certification bodies and IATF members knowing the certificate is suspended, people outside that close group would not understand that the certificate is suspended. Obviously, IATF automatic notification from the IATF database if you're a tier 1 to an IATF OEM, any of the 9. The way the IATF database works, it automatically sends an email to the designated contact person within the OEM, which identifies that a certificate is on special state or suspended, which could link to special status and issues with your scorecard. The process then continues, and you have a 90-day before you have to have a maximum 90-day before you have to have a special audit on site to close the non-conformity. So again, the certification body comes back, looks to verify the effective corrective action undertaken and close the non-conformity. So that's an additional audit. So that's additional costs for for organisations. And then we go back to the 120-day where we have to make the decision to either reinstate or withdraw the certificate. So obviously, you know, ineffective corrective action or ineffective problem solving can lead to additional cost for clients in terms of the certification process, let alone the cost that's involved internally with taking additional corrective action and problem solving time. And if we look at problem solving, just to look at where we are in terms of the IATF requirement, it says the organisation should have a documented process for problem solving, and this should include certain areas. So defined approaches for various types and scale of problems, including new product development, current manufacturing issues, field failures, and audit findings. So it might be organisations have slightly different processes for different type of audit. We need to look at containment, interim actions and related activities necessary to control non-conforming outputs. We need to undertake root cause analysis, identify the methodology used, and analyse analysis and results. We need to look at implementation of systemic corrective actions, including consideration for the impact on similar processes and products. We need to take verification of the effectiveness of the implemented corrective action. Okay, so we have to verify effectiveness before we talk to the certification body if you're an organisation. And obviously the link, particularly if it's in terms of manufacturing related, we need to review and where necessary update appropriate documentation, and the examples given in the standard are PFMEA and control plan. So let's look at minor nonconformities, look at major nonconformities. So these are the top 10 minor nonconformities. And we can see quite clearly that the number one nonconformity in terms of minors, almost 14,000 minor non-conformities have been issued against 6123 contingency planning. And we'll take another look again in a minute about more details about contingency planning, but there's significant evidence to suggest this is around the requirement for regular testing and also the impact of the sanctioned interpretation about cyber security. And then the second biggest one was total productive maintenance, which, as we know, is a new requirement with IATF 16949. So that's had just over 10,000 minor non-conformities against it, and that's to do with things like maintenance objectives and linking into management review. And if you think about corrective action and problem solving in terms of the top 10 majors, you'll see problem solving appears down in 8th position with 6,500 to 7,000 minor non-conformities. I'm now going to hand back to Ellie, who's going to run the third and final poll.
Thanks, Rob. So here's our final poll of this afternoon. Did you receive a minor non-conformity for one of the top 10 areas identified, which Rob just ran through? So to recap again, they were contingency planning, total productive maintenance, control plan, manufacturing design output, standardized work and operator instructions, control of production, design and development inputs, problem solving, measurement systems analysis, and verification of job setups. And just like the previous two, the responses quite straightforward: yes, no, and I don't know. So 74% of you said yes, so that's much higher than we saw just a moment ago for the major non-conformities. 18 no, and 8% I don't know. So that's quite interesting. I'm going to pass you back to Rob for his thoughts.
Thanks, Ellie. Yeah, that's interesting. If we look at that, so 78% of the people on the webinar received an NC against the top 10 minors, whereas if we compared that with the top 10 majors, only 31% of people on the call, their organisation received majors. And then quite low down, if you think about no, 16%, which is quite clear that the global spread is across most organisations in similar areas of weakness. So let's just pick up on contingency planning, which was the top minor non-conformity, and just review the requirements that are in the standard. So it says the organisation shall identify and evaluate internal and external risks to all manufacturing processes and infrastructure equipment essential to maintain production output and to ensure that customer requirements are met. It then says we should define contingency plans according to risk and the impact on the customer. Prepare contingent plans for continuity of supply in the event any of the following key equipment failures: interruption from externally provided products and processes and services, reoccurring natural disasters, fire and utility interruptions. And then we see the sanctioned interpretation, which came out in October 2017. Cyber attacks on information technology systems, labour shortages or infrastructure disruptions. And it's quite clear that a large proportion of the non-conformities raised in the area against that sanctioned interpretation 3. The requirements then go on to say, include as a supplement to contingency plans a notification process to the customer and other interested parties for the extent and duration of any situation impacting on customer operations. Periodically test the contingency plans for effectiveness. It talks about simulations as appropriate, another high area of failure in terms of non-conformities. Conduct contingency plan reviews, and it talks about a minimum annually, using a multidisciplinary team, including top management, and update as required. Document the contingency plans and retain documented information describing any revisions, including the persons or person who is authorised to make the change or changes. And then the second highest minor non-conformity was total productive maintenance. And let's just go look over the requirements of total productive maintenance before we move on. So the organisation shall develop, implement and maintain a documented total productive maintenance system. And total productive maintenance is a huge topic, so IATF specified the minimum system requirements. Identification of process and equipment necessary to produce conforming products at the required volume. Availability of replacement parts for equipment identified in the list. Provision of resource for machine, equipment and facility maintenance. Packing and preservation of equipment, tooling, engaging. Applicable customer specific requirements. And then it moves on to F, which is particularly the big area of failure. Documented maintenance objectives. And it talks about examples of OEE, so overall equipment effectiveness, mean time between failure, mean time to repair, preventive maintenance compliance metrics, performance to maintenance objectives will form an input into management review, and it links to the requirements of 9001 and section 9.3 of the standard. Yeah, so as much as looking at performance in terms of delivery, cost and quality, we need to ensure that the maintenance objectives are regularly reviewed during management review. Where failing, action plan to address corrective actions where objectives are not achieved. Use of preventative methods, use of predicted methods as applicable, and periodic overhaul. Okay, so some interesting areas in terms of where we are in terms of the top 2 minor non-conformities. Just before we move on looking at the SIs and the FAQs, we have done a support document, which I believe is one of the handouts, where you can see the top 10 major and minor non-conformities globally compared to the top 10 major and minor non-conformities in the Americas area, in the EMEA area, and the APAC area, which you can download as one of the handouts. And I think you'll see there's some interesting differences between top 10 major and minor non-conformities, particularly when you compare global to Americas in terms of majors and global to Americas in terms of minors. But I'll let you download the handout and read at your leisure. But if you've got any questions at a later date, you can always come back to BSI with them. Okay, so back end of last year, there was some new what we call latest rules. Sanctioned interpretation 6 and 7 were released in November. I just want to read through them briefly so everyone can understand that some of the requirements that's also put on the certification body. So the first sanction interpretation 6 was all about how as certification bodies we control and maintain and develop our auditors. And you'll see that in here there's a requirement for ongoing measurement on the performance and continued development. And there's some new requirements being brought into place. So things like submission and timeliness of the final audit report, acceptability of client non-conformities, results of certification decisions that our veto powers take against the recommendation from the auditor, results of IATF witness audits. Obviously, auditors from all certification bodies undergo regular IATF witness audits. Individual non-conformity analysis. So IATF provide a lot of data and track a lot of data, and certifications track a lot of data in terms of non-conformity analysis. All certifications are compared on the number of NCs per audit, the percentage of majors, and also the percentage of audits with no non-conformities. And now we're looking to use the same measurements to track performance of individual auditors. Results of certification body internal witness audits. So obviously we have to do our internal witness audits, and also results of post-audit surveys. So clients completing after audit questionnaires. And the rationale for the change from IATF was to improve the criteria certification bodies use to monitor and measure the performance of their auditors, and to require the process to define an acceptable level of performance for IATF auditors. Also, to explain the IATF can impose sanctions against any IATF qualified auditor based on their performance or if fraudulent activity is discovered. So quite a lot of controls to required to track, maintain and develop certification body auditors. Sanctioned interpretation 7 was just to add some other clarity about what is within the eligibility requirements. So the providers of the reflective vests, which go in the boot or the trunk of vehicles, are now allowed to be eligible for certification. There was a couple of sanctioned interpretations raised against the standards, so let's have a quick look at those. The first one around the requirement for quality management system audits, and some clarity was given. And it says the complete audit cycle remains 3 years in length. The quality management system audit frequency for individual processes audited within the 3-year audit cycle should be based on internal and external performance and risk. Organisations shall maintain justification for the assigned audit frequency of their processes. All processes are required to be sampled throughout the 3-year audit cycle and audited to all applicable requirements in the IATF 16949 standard, including 9001 base requirements and any customer specifics. And the rationale for the IATF said that the audit cycle remains 3 years in length, but they've deleted the requirement of FAQ 18 and SI 14, which says that certified all processes are to be audited during the audit 3-year cycle. So just clarification really about what's needed in terms of internal system audits, and this talks about quality audits. And then there wasn't a definition of embedded software within IATF 16949, so there's now a definition. Lots of questions have been asked of IATF about what's considered to be embedded software. And the sanction interpretation gives the following definition. Embedded software is a specialized program stored in an automotive component, typically computer chip or other non-volatile memory storage, specified by the customer or as part of the system design to control its functions. To be relevant in the scope of IATF 16949 certification, the part is controlled by embedded software must be developed for an automotive application, i.e. passenger cars, light commercial vehicles, heavy trucks, buses and motorcycles, for achieving recognition. The software to control any aspect of the manufacturing process, e.g. machine to manufacture component or material, is not included in the definition of an embedded software. I think that's quite clear and answers many of the questions that IATF were being asked about the definition of embedded software. We'll talk a little about audit, IATF audit common report. Some of you out in the automotive area will know that IATF have decided to commonize a number of the reports. So IATF are looking to identify, confirm and require all certification bodies to use a single common report. And that's been done for stage 1 readiness reviews, surveillance audits, recertification and transfer audits, special audit, and also for the non-conformity report. And they've come up with various requirements that are mandatory in terms of a common report. They've been shared with the certification bodies, and now the certification bodies and IATF are working on an implementation of this common audit report. So I would imagine sometime towards the end of this year, the IATF will require the new common reports to go in place and be released. Excuse me. And then you obviously, regardless of which certification body you use, and currently there's 41 certification bodies, you'll have exactly the same format. So what's on page 3 with BSI will be the same that's on page 3 with every other certification body. What's on page 6, page 7, format, content will be exactly the same. I thought it'd be interesting just to pick up on a couple of things, particularly when we're auditing the processes that IATF are going to mandate in terms of format. So in terms of process performance, every single identified process the organisation has in terms of their quality management system, defined in their quality management system, all the KPIs have to be reviewed and questioned and clarified in the following way. So you'll see there'll be expectation that all the process KPIs are recorded, what the current targets are and the results. And then there's a question about achieved. So are the results achieved, yes or no? There's then a requirement to look at the trend since the last audit. So is it a positive trend? Is it a negative trend? Is it consistent? And then there's a requirement to see over the trend over the last 3 years, which obviously links a lot to the recertification audit process, where you have to go back and look at the system effectiveness over the 3 years, whether those KPIs are positive, negative or consistent. So you may well see certification bodies now start to add that as additional information into their certification body reports as we move forward to the implementation of the new IATF audit report. So please be aware that those are going to be mandatory requirements, mandatory records that we'll have to record as part of the audit. And we know that the current rules for which certification bodies operate require that if process KPIs aren't being met, and there's a program in place for corrective action and timing. If that's not been effectively implemented, then that has to result automatically in a major non-conformity. Then we're back into the suspension, the 90-day on-site audit, the additional cost issue. So it's very significant. And the reason IATF are doing this is to drive obviously system improvement and the robustness of the management system. So just to pick up a little bit about beyond transition, there's some IATF meetings going on this year where we might see some additional changes to the requirements. Obviously, excuse me, sorry. If you look at the top 10 major non-conformities and top 10 minor non-conformities, that might need to lead to additional requirements in terms of training. And just to confirm, obviously, as similar to other certification, BSI operate and provide a whole list of other additional training requirements related to the IATF standard and core tools. I think we heard for a long time that the FMEA manual is going to change. I think as of today, there hasn't been a date identified. The draft went out, and you could review it and comment on the AIG website, and you could also download a version from the VDA QMC website. My understanding is there's been a lot of modifications made. There's a massive amount of feedback from the stakeholders. The draft's been revised. It's more or less ready to go. We're just now waiting for a date for the release. And then I'm just going to hand back to Ellie, because Ellie's going to pick up on the next slide.
Thanks very much, Rob. Please do remember to keep your questions coming in. We're going to turn to those shortly. But if you would like any more information on anything that you've heard today, please visit bsigroup.com/automotive, or if you go to bsigroup.com, you can select your country in the top right-hand side of the homepage, then go to industry sectors and select automotive. So please do get in touch if you have any questions relating to what we've heard today. So we're just going to turn now to your questions, and what I'll do is I'll pick a few and hand over to Rob to reply. Just going to pick a question here. Okay, so we've got a question here about UK. So obviously Rob's presented a lot of global information. Do we know where the UK is, Rob?
Yeah, interestingly, you saw the graph that showed the top 10 countries. If we put the UK on, UK is currently about 568 certificates. So we'd be 17th in terms of certificate content only.
Great, thanks very much, Rob. And we're going to move to another question now. So we're going to go for this one here. IATF require 21 documented process. All this process shall have measures and need to be included in management review. Question.
Yeah, that's right. And then at the end of the day, the IATF standard requires a number of mandatory documented processes. I think the question is right, 21. Yeah, and as you saw with the demonstration of the need for KPIs and the way they're going to be tracked, if the organisation defines its 21 processes, you might combine processes together and end up with maybe 14 or 15. But whatever you define in terms of processes, whether they're combined or individual, there's an expectation they have process measures for effectiveness and efficiency, and they have to be reviewed regularly in management review.
Thanks very much. Another question here for you, Rob. Where can I find all of the sanctioned interpretations from IATF?
Yeah, IATF has what they call the IATF Global Oversight website.org. If you go onto globaloversight.website.org, you can register your email address. And when anything changes with the IATF standard, whether that's sanctioned interpretations, frequently asked questions, OEM customer-specific requirements change, you automatically get an email that links directly to the changes. So yeah, all sanctioned interpretations, both for the standard and the rules, IATF, www.iatfglobaloversight.org is the home for everything.
Thanks very much, Rob. We've got a few of you asking if we'll share the presentation afterwards. The answer is yes, we'd be delighted to. There's also a question about US training, because obviously the handout I referenced is UK. If you go to bsigroup.com and find your way to the automotive sector page, there'll be a link through from there where you can see your local courses. and their locations and dates. So we're just going to move to another question now. Just bear with us while we go through.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think that one of the questions are, were NC volumes similar across certification bodies? I don't know. I could tell you what BSIs are. I know where we are compared to the global average. But in terms of all certification bodies, IATF and Oversight regularly compare NCs across all the certification bodies. I would say if you look at the top 10 majors and minors based on the BSI audits for 2018, very similar in terms of areas. But if you look at the analysis by region, which is one of the attachments, you'll see a significant lack of alignment. If you look at the top 10 majors globally and compare them to EMEA and APAC, there's a 90% alignment. If you compare them to the Americas, there's only a 50% alignment. I think you'll be interested to see some of the alignment with America, where other things come in like customer satisfaction. So please do download that and have a look at that one.
Thanks, Rob. And we're just flicking through some of the other questions that have come in. So we have a question here. If targets of the process are not met, is it a major non-conformity?
Yeah, the IATF rules, 5th edition, requires that the certification body auditor, when they go and look at the KPIs for processes, and if the KPI process is related to customer satisfaction or any of the KPIs directed as part of customer specific requirements are not being achieved, there's a requirement on the organisation. The organisation needs to have a corrective containment, sort of problem-solving approach, planning in place with identified actions, identified responsibilities, and identified timing. So a certification body audit has to review that action plan and determine whether the action plan has been effectively implemented. So first thing, if there's no action plan, that will automatically be a major. If there's an action plan that's in place that is behind implementation, and no justification really for why or any revision of the corrective action plan, then again, if that's a customer related KPI, the IATF mandate, again, that's a mandatory non-conformity.
Thanks very much, Rob. We are coming to the end of the questions, so we'll maybe just handle another one. And the question is, does suspension of our certificate require us to notify customers per IATF or notes?
Yeah, so it's interesting because the IATF rules identifies that obviously when the certificate is suspended, there's an automatic email sent to an IATF OEM. If you look at the IATF OEM customer specific requirements, which can be found on that global oversight website I mentioned earlier, there are customer specific requirements in there that require the organisation to identify, I think it's fraud, you have to identify fraud within 5 days of notification of suspension. So that's a customer specific requirement. So there isn't really a standard approach across all IATF OEMs, but there's definitely requirements about timeliness of identifying suspension. If you're further down the supply chain and not requiring IATF, not tier 1 to an IATF OEM, then the situation is slightly different. But certainly if you're supplying an IATF OEM, you have to notify them because they automatically get the email trigger when the certification body turns the certificate to suspension. So they'll know anyway. So they can track whether you're meeting the customer specific requirements in terms of timeliness of notification.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Rob. Thanks for all your questions as well. There are some that we haven't been able to get to, but as I said before, what we'll do is we'll contact you after the webinar and answer those for you. So I'd like to thank Rob for an interesting and insightful presentation, and you, the audience, of course, for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the webinar. So all that remains for me to say is thank you very much and goodbye.